Hi everybody, welcome to this third lesson, revising myths and beliefs. Beliefs in the afterlife we're going to look at today. So first of all, we're going to look at tombs and then we're going to look at the underworld. Let's have a look at the lesson purpose. Here you'll see three lesson purposes as usual. First of all, we're going to revise the manner and the format of Roman funerary inscriptions. So that's inscriptions that are set up to commemorate the dead. Then we're also going to introduce some sources from Pompeii and Herculaneum which show these the format of funerary inscriptions and that you can use in essays. And finally, we're going to look at the layout of the underworld and its implications for how a Roman would live their life, and assess whether a Roman would live differently based on their experience, what their experience of the underworld might be. So the first task I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think for 5 minutes about the positives and negatives of using an inscription as a source for the ancient world, as a source for, in particular, Roman opinions and beliefs on the afterlife. When you've finished assessing this, the positives and negatives, if you click onto the next slide, there are some suggestions that I have come up with. I'd like you to add those to your suggestions in a table as seen on the PowerPoint. So when you're ready, click onto the next slide to see my suggestions. So the next activity is a source-based activity. You'll see on the left-hand side an inscription, a reconstruction of an inscription from Chester. The reconstruction is Roman inscriptions in Britain. That is Roman inscriptions in Britain 452. It can be found at Chester. The reconstruction that you see on the left-hand side is obviously painted. It's important to remember that history seems to think of Roman architecture, Roman inscriptions as being white marble, and that's perpetuated by Renaissance art, Michelangelo and Bernini and such. But it's important to note that these would be painted, and inscriptions, the letterings on these inscriptions, would be painted in red as seen on this inscription. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes again. I'd like you to make some notes, and I'd like you to answer the questions that are on this slide. First of all, what's the person's name, what's his job, and how old was he when he died? If you can do the bonus, I'll be very impressed. What does DM stand for at the top of an inscription? That's a standard format on a Roman inscription. When you're ready, click onto the next slide, I'll give you the answers. So the inscription RIB 492 is an inscription found at Chester. That should have given you a clue to the gentleman's job. His name is Caecilius Avitus. That was the answer to question 1. As can be seen at the top of the inscription, his job was Optio in the 25th Legion, which was stationed at Chester, and he was 34 years old. This is a good piece of evidence to show the relevance and the importance of inscriptions, funeral inscriptions, for understanding the Roman world. That gives us so much information. We get his job, his name, and his age. And that is the standard format, as you can see on this slide, of a Roman funerary inscription. So the first thing that will come on a funerary inscription is the word letters DM, which means de smalibus. to the spirits of the gods, to the shades of the underworld. So the Manes were spirits of the dead who lived in the underworld, and it was their job to sort of ferry, along with Mercury, to ferry the spirit of the deceased down to Pluto. Alongside that was a formula that would be followed in most inscriptions, and obviously depending on the size of the inscription and the money spent on it, you might add more information, but the basic information you get is their name, you get their age, and you get some other information. That tends to be, particularly if they're a man, their profession. You also might get who the inscription's been set up by, if it was set up by a slave in particular. In addition, you also get standard abbreviations on Latin inscriptions. So Vix is an abbreviated form of Vixit, meaning like he survived or he conquered, he lived. And then you get An, A-N-N is highlighted there, short for Annis, and then you'll get some sort of Roman numeral indicating how old they were when they died. So as well as the format of an inscription, what was just as important to the Romans was how it was consumed, how the tomb increased the relevance of the person that had died in society. So you can see a modern road just outside Pompeii, which still has intact, thanks to the preservation of Pompeii, tombs running alongside the road. Particularly, you can see altars here. They're not really clear on the highlighter, unfortunately. And these inscriptions are placed in a position for people to read them and consume them, to understand the person that had set this tomb up. That in itself is important because it shows us Roman attitudes towards death and the commemoration of death, and particularly that it was important for people to respect your achievements when you've gone, and setting up tombs on the roadside is an important part of that. So we're moving on to the second lesson focus now, which is looking at some sources. Here is one of the most important tombs in Pompeii. This is the tomb of Eumacheia. Eumacheia was a woman, a priestess. We don't have many tombs, particularly of this size, to women in the ancient world, and this is probably the most remarkable tomb in Pompeii. Eumacheia was an important part of Pompeian life. She had a factory in the Forum. She was also a priestess, and Eumacheia owned property and possessed a lot of money, so was able to set this tomb up for herself as a commemoration of everything she's achieved. And you can see by the size of it, that's quite substantial. With the other sources, I'm going to let you flick through, spend as much time as you need, and we'll talk about the importance of how someone was buried and how their body was respected when we look at a written source at the end of these visual ones. Your next task is to study this source E, which is given to you there, the image. This is taken from a GCSE in 2017. This is an unseen source. You'll see it's not in your source booklet. I'd like you to have a look at it and think and answer the question. Explain why graves and tombstones were important to the Romans. Use source E and the other sources you've studied. I think you could use source E there and maybe some of the tombs you've seen in the slideshow before to answer that question. It is a 6-mark question. So I'd like you to have a go at it, please. Time yourself, if possible, 10 minutes. Try and be specific with your references to the sources as is possible. So here you'll see a mark scheme for this question, 6-marker, from the exam. The answers might include, and you'll see here that you needed to reference the source that was given to you and other sources. You had to do both. The Romans wanted people to remember, and that's what source E tells us, and it gives us details on the person's life, and the image on the left-hand side shows he's a scribe. You can very faintly on his on the hand on the left-hand side, so his right hand, see he's holding a stylus. Other sources you could bring in are sources along the roadside, as we saw in those images. The parentalia, which we've not discussed yet, that's coming later. But other inscriptions, RIB, the inscription found at Chester, and you will be able to bring in more and more information as we look at some written sources as we move through this PowerPoint. You'll notice on the right hand side we get given examiner's guidance. Translation of the inscription is not required or expected. This paper doesn't assess your ability to translate Latin, so don't worry about giving a bit of Latin and then having to translate it. That's not what they're asking you to do. Okay. Mentioned in that art scheme, here is an extract of Ovid's Fasti, which means his calendar days, and he goes through each day of the year and talks about what happens on those days. But Ovid is a poet, so it's quite stylistic in the way it's written. This is from Book 2 of the Fasti, and it talks about the festival called the Parentalia. Now, you should be able to understand vaguely what this is about, but I've highlighted some key quotations for you here. Honour is given to tombs as well. Placate the souls of your fathers and bring small gifts to the pyres after they have died down. That means after the pyres have died down, so after the fires of the tombs has gone out, make sure you tend to the tombs of your family members. So he goes on to talk about how you might do that. This was I want to highlight in particular this word here, piety. It's all linked to a Roman ideal. Called pietas, and hopefully you've heard that word before. Pietas is the Latin word loyalty, and pietas works in 3 ways. You should show loyalty or pietas to the gods, you should show pietas to the state, and you should show it to the family. And this is part of showing your loyalty to the family, is continuing to respect your elders and your family members when they're gone. We are told in Roman funerals themselves, if you had passed away, you would then have images, masks, and it's quite an odd thing for modern listeners or modern readers to read about. You would hire actors to wear the masks and pretend to be your ancestors, which is a bit weird. But it was important that at your funeral, your family, your living family, were able to show, well, this is the line of people that this person has come from. And status and family links was a huge part of being Roman. Well, what are the consequences if you don't attend to the pyres that have died down? Well, Ovid, in traditional dramatic Ovidian style, doesn't go and say, well, you get a slap on the wrists or you get bad luck for 7 years. In fact, I scarcely believe this. He gives what the fairy tale that the Romans would believe. The kids were told. They say that our ancestors came out of their graves and uttered groans during the silent night, and that through the city streets and the wide fields howled ugly spirits, a ghostly crowd. He's essentially describing zombies. So if you don't tend to the tomb of your family, this is what happens. This is a story designed to make children realise the importance of tending to your family's tomb, scare them into doing it. And you see the final quotation. After that, the honours that had been neglected were given to the tombs. So the easiest way to remedy these sort of ghoulish zombies that have come out from the ground, the ghosts of our ancestors, is to just do the things that you're meant to be doing. Nothing special, just bringing gifts. Don't have to be big. You'll see in the quotations here, sprinkled corn, a bit of food, bread softened in wine, loose violets or flowers, make it a nice atmosphere in the tomb. Add some prayers and appropriate words at the heart you have set up, just as Aeneas had done. And the key bit of information, it says that once upon a time, they abandoned the parental days because they were busy off fighting wars, and you shouldn't do that. It's important to note, by contrast, the reason Ovid brings up Aeneas is because in Book 5 of the Aeneid, Aeneas is travelled to Italy, and the first thing he does is hold a funeral games for his deceased father before he does anything else. So he realised the importance of giving his father a fitting send-off, and you can read about that in Book 5 of Virgil's Aeneid. So what evidence have we got if we're asked a question on the Roman opinions on death and the afterlife? Well, I think a good piece of evidence to start off with is the tomb of Eumacia. You can see the size of it. Additionally, it shows that this wasn't just a right reserved for men, it was also for women too. R.I.B. Chester, 942. Soldiers get a proper burial. People on the other side of the empire get a proper burial. It's important to remember the Roman Empire at this point is very, very vast. And you get the same type of burial if you're in the northwest of England as you would do if you were in the southeast of Italy. A really good source for evidence of Roman opinions on death and the afterlife is Ovid's Fasti, the Parentale, which we just read. It's fairly obvious that that is very rich with evidence to show the importance, as far as the Romans are concerned, of paying due respect to your ancestors. Images of Pompeian tombs particularly show how they line the streets and the roads of Pompeii, particularly outside of Pompeii. And we even have some inscriptions. I'll try and find these for you and send them to you. We have some inscriptions which directly address the reader. So say, hello traveller, here lies this person who survived for this long. These are meant to that quite clearly shows a piece of evidence that these inscriptions are meant to be consumed. They're not just for show, and they're meant to sort of prolong the status of the person even after they've died. And the final bit of evidence, which is what we're going to look at next, is beliefs on the underworld. Particularly Aeneid Book 6 is quite rich in information about Roman opinions on death and the afterlife. So that's what we're going to look at next. I would like you to make a note of this this slide. I'd like you to copy this down in your notes exercise book or whatever you're doing to make notes before we move on to look at Aeneid Book 6 and what the Romans believed about the underworld. The first task I'd like you to do on the underworld is to draw a map of it. That might be an odd concept, but I would like you to watch the video below. It's quite a good one. It's quite extensive, but you might need to watch it a few times. It's a lot of information in a short space of time. But what does the organisation of the underworld add to our understanding of Roman beliefs on the underworld is an important question that we need to consider. And the best way to start that is to draw a map of the underworld as you would imagine it in your head. If you're in year 11, you might have already done this, so you can skip on to doing another revision task later on in the PowerPoint. However, in year 10, I do think it's a really valuable opportunity to orientate in your head where things are and the stages you need to go through if you go on what's called a katabasis, which I'll write on the slide, which is a heroic journey to the underworld. All the best heroes in Greek myth have to have a katabasis. Achilles, Perseus, Theseus, Orpheus, who does it slightly differently. Aeneas has to have a katabasis. Virgil has to give him one for him to be considered a good hero, and that's a journey to the underworld, which happens in book 6. So watch the video, draw the map of the underworld before you move on to the next slide. Okay, so I've taken an extract from Aeneid book 6 for the next activity, and so you've just finished drawing the map of the underworld. Alongside of that, we're going to now look at some literary evidence about the underworld. I'd like you to read the extract, which is on the next slide, and extract quotations and attach them to your map. So drawing arrows and providing yourself with evidence so that if you want to reference the underworld in an essay, you can do so with clear reference to a text. Remember, this is a source-based exam. Have a look at the one on the next slide. I've highlighted it in red. You will see that the water is guarded by the terrible Charon in his filthy rags. That's quite clearly going to be attached to Charon. But it just gives you something to show off your knowledge to the examiner. If you can make specific reference and say in Aeneid book 6, the Charon, the ferryman of the River Styx, is described as being terrible in his filthy rags, that would really impress an examiner. So make some, highlight some other sections of this, attach them to your map, and that's the final activity of this lesson on tombs and burials and on beliefs in the afterlife. The next slide is contains a link to a Check Your Understanding Google form, as with the other PowerPoints. Have a go at that. I will receive your replies and I'll give you feedback as soon as I can on that. As ever, if you've got any questions, please do email me. Don't sit there and struggle with something in particular, and feel free to do your own research outside of this. I've taken stuff from your source book and from my knowledge, but if you're fascinated fascinated by something, or something in particular has caught your eye and you think, I want to learn more about that, you can either look for it yourself or ask me and I can help you with that. So thank you very much.